Hello there, welcome to the channel. Hope you're all well out there. Today I'm going to be discussing a race that were encountered by the USS Discovery in the 23rd century, a species that I think represents an interesting addition to the galaxy of the Federation, called the Baul. The Baul were a somewhat humanoid species that were encountered as the predatory race to the Kelpians. They shared the same homeworld, but the Baul appeared to be the dominant faction and more violent and aggressive than the somewhat docile Kelpians. Before we get started discussing this rather peculiar species, please like, share, subscribe and comment down below. However, keep it civil. This is not an opportunity to simply rag on Star Trek Discovery. The Baul, despite appearances, were not necessarily purely the aggressor. There is an argument to say that the transgressions of the ancestors of the people that you're angry with, the current people you're dealing with, are not to blame, nor are you truly the victims of those people. But the Baul carried a racial memory, effectively, not literally, but as a culture, of just how bad things were when the roles were reversed and the Kelpians were the ones who were in charge. You see, the two races shared the same homeworld, and despite appearances, the Kelpians are actually the more aggressive species. Kelpians, in terms of physical appearance, are tall, slenderly built with pale white skin and look relatively inoffensive, unless they've gone through the Baul, in which case their race kind of turn into a more predatory and aggressive species and less docile and controllable as they are pre-Baul. The Baul, on the other hand, in contrast, look more dangerous. Again, they're rather tall, slender creatures that are more aquatic in nature, and I'm not going to lie, kind of covered in a weird, gross, black, oily substance that kind of drips off them. They have long, slender fingers and limbs, and they have spines on their back. They're a rather unpleasant looking species from the point of view of a human, but that doesn't make them inherently evil. At one point, over 2,000 years earlier, the Kelpians had been the dominant power of their homeworld, but the Baul, forced through circumstances, had become the technologically superior of the two. But by this point, their race were driven to near extinction as they were hunted by the Kelpians. Their numbers had dwindled to less than 300 individuals. They were, however, using their technology, able to turn the tide on the Kelpians, and they wiped out all the Kelpians that had undergone the Baul, and all the remaining Kelpians could be kept more controllable. The Baul kept them subservient, erased their history, and basically made them perform a type of ritual sacrifice before they reached the age where they would undergo the transformation into the more predatory version of their own species, at which point the Baul, probably starting out as some kind of gross revenge, Oedipus eat your heart out, would eat the Kelpians. And let's face it, those kind of poor Kelpians, even in the mirror universe, the goddamn Terrans were eating them. Do they taste nice or something? I mean, I know we called them Kelpian, which indicates they're aquatic. Ironically, interestingly, it was actually the Baul who were the aquatic of the two. But seriously, eating them? What the hell is with the thing with eating people? Anyway, fast forward about 2,000 years, and the Baul are still dominant on their homeworld. By this point, they are a warp-capable species. They defend their homeworld mostly with fighters, but have technology and weapons in place to basically get rid of the Kelpians if there was ever the danger that the great balance between the two races would ever be, well, unbalanced. And just to mention it, at some point in the future, I'm going to have to do an actual breakdown of the Baul ships themselves, the Century vessels. These are pretty damn unique looking vessels with a vertical alignment rather than the traditional horizontal alignment that we see most starships and space stations and other installations across the Alpha and Beta quadrants typically have. These are pretty damn unique and big ships that they use to defend their homeworld. So these fighting vessels, these Century ships, they're on a pretty damn big scale for such a, let's face it, a provincial race. And I will do more of a detailed breakdown of them. but I thought it was worth mentioning that these ships are impressive in scale. They learn that Saru, one of the Kelpians, had left the planet and had undergone the Baul. They tried to kill him and then later actually tried to wipe out his entire race, again leaning into this idea that the Baul were actually the aggressor. What we learn is not necessarily the case, although again, sins of the father kind of idea. Debate in the comments whether or not the Baul really had the right to keep the Kelpians oppressed in this way out of some cultural concept of revenge for the sins of their predecessors. The Baul would ultimately be defeated by the intervention of the Federation Starfleet somewhat, and the uprising of the Kelpians against them, and as the Kelpians learned of their true power, it would begin a process of more equalizing the two factions. Again, the Baul were technologically superior. They had transporters, shielding, advanced weapons, and warp capability by this point, all things the Kelpians effectively lacked, as they'd been kept at a pre-warp state of technological development as a race of indoctrinated slaves and cattle for the Baul. Now, we can fast forward again about another 1,000 years-ish, to the 31st century, where we now see that the two races live in a much greater state of balance, and it is good to see that they've overcome their old issues between the two civilizations and have harmonized. The Baul overall are an aggressive, somewhat xenophobic and isolationist style culture. They're ruled by the simply named Baul High Council, although their exact government structure beyond that can be assumed to be a little bit more complicated, but we don't really know what their overall leader is. Is it president, a prefect, a chancellor, could be anything. We do see that their technology is very sophisticated, but it doesn't really compare to that directly of Starfleet. But they did have technology in place, ready and more than willing to use it in the 23rd century to wipe out the Kelpians, indicating that despite the fact that it had been over 2,000 years, their race still remembered how bad things were all those millennia ago, and were not willing to allow the same situation to happen again. That is some cultural, ingrained, stubborn determination. Imagine the force of will needed for an entire race to keep another race entirely subjugated for 2,000 years and develop technologies with the specific intent of obliterating that entire race, basically leveling your own planet, just to prevent them ever becoming a threat again. That takes some willpower as a culture, indicating just that this race were strong. They came back from near extinction of less than 300 individuals to rebuild their civilization, go back to the stars properly, develop warp technology and other advanced sciences, all the while oppressing another civilization. Now, there are many bad things in this, and although we can understand why they started down this path, it still speaks to just how resilient a species the Baul truly were, and are somewhat misunderstood, and clearly by the 31st century the differences between the two races have been overcome and they had now become more harmonious. But let me know in the comment section below where you all stand on whether the Baul were really justified in doing what they did. Did they have a right to fully suppress the Kelpians? Should they have simply annihilated them as an extreme example, considering the Kelpians took them to near extinction? Some would say that that would have been justice. But also, there's an argument to be made for the possible mercy of the Baul for not doing that. Yes, they enslaved them. Yes, they ate them. They did a lot of bad things, and it's not easy to say they were on the side of good or bad, but they didn't just annihilate them. Whether they are not thought to themselves, one day we could maybe get past this, is unlikely maybe, but all the same, they didn't just simply resort to annihilation up front. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below.